This is 1A. I'm Joshua Johnson in Washington. Last year, Beto O'Rourke won the admiration of Democrats around the country as he fought one of the most closely watched Senate battles against Texas Republican Ted Cruz.
I will make sure that as your senator, we always find a way to work with anyone, anytime, anywhere on the issues that are most important to us as a country.
It was such a narrow defeat that many took it as a sign of his political viability, and now he's running for president.
We know that walls do not save lives. Walls end lives. We stand for America, and we stand against walls.
Can the former congressman ride the enthusiasm and excitement he found on the campaign trail in Texas all the way to the White House? He joins us in studio today as part of our series, Foresight 2020. Beto O'Rourke, welcome to 1A.
Thank you for having me.
We welcome your questions and thoughts for the former congressman, so please email us 1a@wamu.org, comment on our Facebook page, or tweet us at 1A. Let's start with the same question we begin with for all the candidates. Why should the American people elect you president?
I want to be the president that this country needs and is so sorely lacking right now. I want to be that president who will heal us instead of inflame this country, who will bring us together instead of further drive us apart. And I want to be the president who helps America meet its ambitions and its aspirations, driven by what we can do together, bringing everyone into the solution instead of operating on the fear that so defines the current administration. I think that's the only way that we achieve our ambitions when it comes to healthcare or immigration or the economy or confronting climate change before it's too late. No half measures, no half steps, and no half the country. It's going to take all of us doing everything that we can to make sure that we meet this moment. I want to be the president who helps to lead this country to do that.
What's your sense of how you would go about beating President Trump in a head-to-head election, particularly siphoning off parts of what is now his base, who were more closely aligned to the Democrats and kind of wandered away in 2016?
I think you saw a preview of that in Texas last year. We were a state that had ranked 50th in voter turnout, not because we don't like our democracy, but literally drawn that way. Some based on race or country of national origin drawn out of a congressional district to diminish the power of their vote or the likelihood that their voice would ever be heard. But we went to every one of those districts, literally every one of those 254 counties, and brought the same progressive message everywhere that we went, to the bluest of places, to the reddest of counties. And at the end of the day, won more votes than any Democrat had ever won before. Importantly to your question, won independence for the first time in decades in Texas, and nearly 500,000 Republicans joined our cause as well. I think it'll take that kind of movement to defeat Donald Trump, that kind of movement to bring a very divided, highly polarized country together. And Texas, with 38 electoral college votes, could be absolutely decisive in November of 2020 and then forever change the electoral landscape going forward.
President Trump had a different assessment of the way that Texans view his policies when he spoke during the opening of a cabinet meeting yesterday. He mentioned that people at the recent rally he held near Dallas liked his idea of pulling troops out of Syria. Critics on both sides of the aisle say that abandoned our Kurdish allies and opened the door for Turkey to invade. But here's part of what the president said yesterday at that cabinet meeting.
My largest cheer in Dallas, I had 25,000 people close in that arena, a record crowd. I had so many people outside of the arena, thousands. My largest cheer that night was two things. We're building the wall. That's number one. And number two, and probably tied for number one, was we're bringing our soldiers back home. That was our largest cheer in Dallas. Great place. Great state, Texas.
That was President Trump speaking during a cabinet meeting yesterday. Now, set aside what was the largest cheer at his rally, because it's obviously his base, so that's not really a litmus test for the American electorate. But with regards to the troop pullout, how would you have handled Syria if you had been in the Oval Office right now? I mean, what's been going on in northern Syria between the Kurds, Turkish forces who are already kind of poking down south from Turkey, Syrians, Russians, was already complex. If you were in the White House right now, what would you be doing?
I would not turn my back, this country's back, on our allies, those Kurdish fighters who fought alongside American service members. very often fought in place of American service members to American goals: to defeat the caliphate of ISIS, to detain ISIS fighters and supporters, more than 10,000 that were being guarded by Kurdish soldiers and Kurdish service members, and Kurds who were going to be there for us going forward, so that we could reduce our troop presence. Turning our backs on the Kurds, inviting the Turkish army into northern Syria, setting the stage for the Russians, for Assad, for ISIS to have a resurgence in that part of Syria, not only dishonors the commitment that we have made, but it puts our service members in a perilous situation. Their supply lines are cut. Their roads in and out of where we have them stationed are compromised. We're bombing our own former bases and supply depots, and we make it less likely that anyone will want to ally with the United States again because we compromise the word of the United States. So it diminishes the security of our service members, our country, our foreign policy objectives, and it brings dishonor on this country. So that was absolutely the wrong thing to do. And it diminishes the likelihood that we're going to be able to be part of a negotiated political settlement in Syria, in Iraq, or anywhere else in the world.
And just to be clear, we were bombing our own installations to prevent the munitions there from falling into enemy hands. There's been an argument, the argument is bringing troops back home. The more that I look at the situation there, I'm not convinced that we can bring our troops home in the way we did, say, after VE Day, where there was a war in a place against a country, and we defeated that country, and we come home in victory, and there's a ticker tape parade down Broadway. How do you see the future of American military engagement in an age of fighting ideologies rather than nations? Can we ever really honestly say, oh, yeah, we can leave this place completely and expect not for that force to attack us again?
I think it makes clear that the lesson to be learned is that we should stop going to war to achieve our foreign policy aims, because you have no way to predict what the end of that war will look like, or, to your point, whether that war will really ever end. 18 years in Afghanistan should make that point. 28 years in Iraq. I was a senior in high school when George H.W. Bush announced U.S. military action, meaning U.S. service members, American lives, in Iraq in 1991. We've been there every single year, every presidential administration since, and there is no end in sight. And it's hard to come to a conclusion other than these wars, as well-intentioned as they may be, as courageous as the U.S. service members whose lives are on the line out there are, that we don't do more harm than good, that we don't create more terrorists than we intended to, and certainly we don't improve the national security standing of this country overseas. Instead, I think we really need to invest in diplomatic solutions, in our convening power to bring other countries to the table, including those with whom we disagree, who we might define as our enemies, to find political solutions to otherwise intractable problems. It's the only way to meet this threat, but it's also the only way to meet the greater challenges that we have on the global stage, like climate change, which well far and beyond what we're talking about with ISIS and al-Qaeda compromises the future of this country and really of human civilization.
One of the critiques of President Trump is that he has no background in foreign policy, that he kind of won on a platform of being a Washington outsider. Critics say he's too much of an outsider and they want someone with more experience. Brian emailed, "We are seeing all too clearly what inexperience in the White House looks like. Why should I not vote for a more experienced candidate?"
I don't know that I can answer the question in the negative, but I'll tell you that in my 6 years in Congress, working on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, I've seen the cost and consequence of war. These brave women and men coming back to this country with the signature wounds and conditions of service and battle and combat, post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, a country that was all too ready to send them into harm's way, but has been incapable of taking care of them when they come back. It's another reason that I come to the conclusion that we should stop going to war everywhere around the world to achieve our foreign policy aims. There has to be a better way to do it. But I also served on the House Armed Services Services Committee and understand that as we spend about $750 billion a year, more than the next 9 military budgets around the world combined and added up, we're not achieving our foreign policy aims at the same time that we're draining the treasure of this country and putting women and men into harm's way without a definition of victory or a commonly understood strategy or any end to these wars in sight. So I'm going to make sure that we use the power of this country to inspire, to convene, to pursue our common goals with other countries on this planet to common end without using 18, 19, 20-year-old women and men to pursue this through military action.
Another aspect of our foreign policy is immigration. You've had a lot to say about that, and I want to ask you about that when we continue. But a quick question with regards to Congress. I think it'll be a quick answer. You said that you supported impeaching President Trump while you were campaigning against Senator Ted Cruz back last year. What do you think now in terms of whether Congress has enough evidence, enough votes to remove the president, not just impeach him, but throw him out?
It's pretty clear to me that the president has obstructed justice in the investigation of Russia's invasion involvement in our election, that he's lied to investigators, that he's pressured witnesses, that he's asked 2 other foreign governments, Ukraine and China, to dig up dirt on a political rival in exchange for favorable treatment from the United States. I think the evidence is crystal clear. Not only should he be impeached, he should be removed from office.
A lot of questions to the effect of what Rick tweeted. Rick writes, why would Beto say he'd take away assault rifles? We know that'll never happen, and I feel it narrows his base. I love my AR-15, and I'm an independent. That statement makes it hard to defend him to my circle of people. I'll let you respond to that in just a moment. I'm Joshua Johnson, and you're listening to 1A from WAMU and NPR. This is 1A. I'm Joshua Johnson. We're continuing our series Foresight 2020, our series of interviews with Democratic presidential candidates with Beto O'Rourke. He's taking your questions on Facebook. Comment on our Facebook page. Tweet us at 1A or email 1A@WAMU.org. We got plenty of questions about the comment you made in the debate in Houston about assault-style rifles. We'll get to that in one second, but since we're talking foreign policy, let me ask you about immigration. We've had a record number of migrants come to the southern border this summer. You said that if you win the presidency, you will take executive action on day one to implement your immigration plan. I know this is something you feel extremely strongly about, being from El Paso, which is a city that is kind of bicultural. You kind of can't tell where one culture ends and the other begins. It's so multicultural. How do you see the strategy for doing this through executive action? If you are elected president and are a one-term president, then the next president could say, I'm going to reverse the O'Rourke immigration plan on day one.
I don't think the goal is to implement immigration reform through executive action. The goal is to rewrite our immigration laws comprehensively in the image of the United States. Communities like this one here in Washington, D.C., or my hometown of El Paso, Texas, which you mentioned, it's not only a binational, bicultural community, it's a community of immigrants and the sons and daughters of immigrants, and one of the safest cities in America today. And those two facts are connected. So we must work with Congress and by extension, the constituents that those members of Congress work for to make sure that everyone's ideas are coming forward and we make the most of this opportunity. But day one, there are some executive steps we can take. For example, reuniting every single one of those separated families, making sure that we never incarcerate another child or another family seeking asylum in this country. We don't criminally prosecute those looking for refuge in America, and that we stop the internal deportations of hundreds of thousands of people who pose no threat or risk to this country, whose presence should be legalized so that they can contribute even more to our success. So there's a lot of cruelty that we can end on day one, a lot of positive things that we can do for this country. But ultimately, yes, we're going to need to work with Congress and the people that Congress represents.
I think we need to be honest when we say that some of the concern about immigration in this country is definitely related to jobs, to the changing economy, to globalization, to the lingering effects of NAFTA, et cetera. We're seeing this around the world with Brexit and so on. Some of it's flat out racism. Some of it is just Americans who say, I don't want those people here. And they don't want to admit that that's what they think, but that is what they think. How do you deal with that?
I think the president has a large responsibility and opportunity in this area. And to define that in the negative, President Trump, who's been warning about these invasions of migrants and caravans and asylum seekers, calling them animals and predators and infestations, though they commit crimes at a far lower rate than those who are born here in this country, he's brought that racism that you're talking about, that is foundational and endemic in America, out into the open. At a rally in Florida in May of this year, he said, how are we going to stop these people from coming into our country? And this guy in the crowd yells out, shoot them. And the crowd roars and laughs in assent, and the president smiles in consent. And a killer from Allen, Texas, drives 600 miles with an AK-47 to El Paso, Texas, publishing a manifesto along the way saying that he is going to try to repel this invasion and is going to try to stop the replacement of white men by Hispanics who are coming across the border, goes into a Walmart, opens fire, kills 22 people, grievously injures many more, and then tells police afterwards, I came to kill Mexicans. So that racism that is not just tolerated, but is welcomed by the president and directed at vulnerable communities has a real cost and consequence in human lives.
But how do you deal with it as president?
By contrast, as president, I'm going to celebrate the fact that we are a country of immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers from the world over, and that is so fundamental to our greatness and our success and our strength, and yes, our safety and our security. And I point to El Paso or McAllen, Texas, or San Diego, California, or New York City. These communities of immigrants are far often safer than the average American city, in large part because of those who chose us and by their very presence have made us stronger and safer than we would have been otherwise. So I think there's a lot that the president can do for good or for bad. We're seeing an example of for bad with President Trump. In my administration, for good in terms of bringing this country together around shared values, one of them being that we are a people of the planet over who have found a home here. That's what has made us the greatest country on the face of the planet.
Plenty of great questions from our listeners. Let's dive into some of them. A lot of the questions we've gotten have had to do with guns and gun safety. Megan tweeted, please thank Beto O'Rourke for pushing the needle on the issue of gun safety. As a Moms Demand Action volunteer, I appreciate his willingness to confront our gun violence crisis with his full voice. Contrast that with what Robert emailed. Robert writes, while I actually agree with your plan to buy back / confiscate assault-style weapons, how does that help mend the deep divisions in this country and enable you to govern for all the people? And Michael emailed, Mr. O'Rourke is being disingenuous when he quotes the 40,000 deaths by guns as a reason to confiscate over 10 million semi-automatic rifles from law-abiding citizens. Aside from the fact that such an action is politically unfeasible on a federal basis, it ignores the reality that AR-15s are not the problem. According to the website 538, 2/3 of gun deaths are suicides, and fewer than 500 deaths per year are due to long guns of any kind. Now, you got a lot of attention during the Democratic debate for saying, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15s, which is an assault-style rifle. South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg says that shift is a shiny object that you've latched onto to stay relevant. And you two had quite an exchange in the last debate.
I don't need lessons from you on courage, political or personal. Everyone on this stage is determined to get something done. Everyone on this stage recognizes, or at least I thought we did, that the problem is not other Democrats who don't agree with your particular idea of how to handle this. The problem is the National Rifle Association and their enablers in Congress, and we should be united in taking the fight to them.
That's a mischaracterization, Anderson. I've got to answer this.
I don't know if Anderson got to let you answer, but I'll let you answer it now. So, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15s. Why? Or more importantly, how? Yeah. How's that going to work?
Well, I think the why is important, and then it lays the predicate for the how. When you see these communities, these families, these people who have lost loved ones to weapons that were designed for war, use on a battlefield, AR-15s, AK-47s, they're high-impact, high-velocity rounds, when they hit the human body and expend all their kinetic energy inside of it, the damage done not only to the person who was shot, not only to the surviving family members, but to a community that is then terrorized. Univision just did a poll of Hispanic Americans in the state of Texas, more than 80% fear that they will be the victims of a mass terror attack like the one that took place in El Paso, Texas. When you meet a mother, as I did in Odessa, Texas, who watched her 15-year-old daughter bleed to death after being shot by an AR-15, and then asked me, why do we allow this to continue? When you know that everyone on that debate stage, Pete Buttigieg included, agreed that we should stop selling AR-15s and AK-47s for the reasons that I just described, then I don't understand the logic that would prevent you from coming to the conclusion that we should also buy every single one of them back, because every one of them is a potential instrument of terror. And the people in this country, Hispanic Americans, kids going into school, are terrified right now at our political impotence to do the right thing because it may not poll well, because it's not the conventional wisdom.
Or because it might get the lawmakers who have to either cross the aisle or defy the party line to support you to pass that unelected. Like I hear the independent who says, I have an AR-15, I'm an independent, I like the idea, but I want to keep my weapon. I think in a political environment where President Trump, for whatever reason, has so much political pull that Republicans are often afraid to oppose him until they've said they're not running for re-election, even if they agreed with you as president, I think to many of them, even to Democrats in more conservative or moderate parts of the country, they know that by saying that, they are done in Congress instantly.
Yeah. Then you don't need political leaders at that point. You just need poll takers and political consultants and triangulators and people who can stick their finger up to the wind to see which way it's blowing. Leadership means that you're going to say what is necessary, speak the truth, and then find a way to bring the country around to those conclusions or the necessary action. Because if we just relied on the polls and are afraid of upsetting independents or not being able to attract Republicans, then why go all the way on health care or on immigration or on climate or on anything? Then just be defined by the half steps and the safe places in which we can reside politically. I think this moment demands that we say things that are true and see things clearly and act decisively. And on guns, if we're going to avert the 40,000 gun deaths, yes, suicides are a big problem. And I think universal background checks, extreme risk protection orders can go a long way towards reducing gun suicide. Raising the age of purchase from 18 to 21 will go a long way to reducing gun suicide in this country. But when you get to these acts of terror that are being committed, when you understand that white nationalist, white supremacist terror is the number one domestic law enforcement challenge right now, don't take it from me, take it from the head of the FBI nominated by President Trump, who says the majority of domestic terror cases that he's investigating are white supremacist terrorists, and they are armed better than they ever have before. Well, we need to take action. It may not be politically popular, but it's the right thing to do.
Paul tweeted, do you think that some of your positions, like taking AR-15s and removal of tax exemption for some intolerant churches, is just red meat for the Trump base with little to no chance to actually happen? I understand where Paul's question is coming from. In the last debate, CNN's Don Lemon asked you if you supported stripping religious institutions of their tax-exempt status if they oppose same-sex marriage, and you said yes, but clarified that applies if the institution denies civil rights to same-sex couples. These do seem like easy boogeyman topics, but maybe if you just clarify that second part for us right quick.
Absolutely. I was asked about tax-exempt nonprofit institutions, and I think a number were mentioned, including religious institutions. My position is the following. The separation between church and state is extraordinarily important. The role that religious institutions play in American life is fundamental to our success. And I know that from my experience in the Catholic Church. I know that from traveling this country and seeing all the good work that comes out of synagogues and mosques and churches and the congregants and parishioners who make that happen. So what you believe, how you congregate, how we pray, that's our business, not the government's. But the minute that you begin offering a service in the public sphere, adoption services, higher education, health care, you are held to the same standard that any other American is, and you have to apply the law without discrimination. based on race, based on ethnicity, based on gender, or sexual orientation or gender identity. And in a country where you can legally be fired today for your sexual orientation or denied the ability to adopt a child because we deem you to be too gay, then I think we need somebody in the White House who's going to fight for the full civil and human rights of every single American. And that's what I'm going to do as president, protecting religious freedom, but making sure that when you offer services in the public space and in the public sphere, you're held to the same standards of the full civil rights and human rights of every single one of us.
I'm Joshua Johnson. You're listening to 1A. Got to ask you about healthcare. Christy tweeted, please explain the difference between your health plan and Pete Buttigieg's Medicare for anyone who wants it and Medicare for all. As I understand it, Medicare for all is nationally provided health care, private insurance goes away, other options go away, everyone's on one plan. Medicare for America allows people to buy into Medicare if they so choose. It's kind of like a publicly available option. But if you have health care that you like from an employer or from other sources, you can keep it. The basal argument of this feels like whether the nation will go far enough, fast enough for the sake of Democratic voters, and whether the Democratic Party, in saying, we want to go this far, no, we want to go that far, no, we don't want to go quite that far, is going to be the right tone to set to beat President Trump among voters who support him. So it's this kind of two-pronged problem, the policy problem and the political problem. Why is your solution the best one to solve both those problems?
Our solution, Medicare for America, says that if you are one of the tens of millions of our fellow Americans who has no insurance, no ability to see a doctor or a therapist or afford your prescriptions, you would immediately be enrolled in Medicare. If you're one of our fellow Americans who is insufficiently insured, meaning you have coverage in name, but you can't afford the copay or the premium, you're unable to bridge that deductible, you can elect to move into Medicare. But if you're one of the tens of millions who have employer-provided insurance that works for you and your family, especially if you're a member of a union that fought for that health care plan, negotiated for it, sometimes in lieu of other earned benefits like a wage increase, and you want to keep that, you're able to do that. I think that is the best way to get to universal, guaranteed, high-quality care for prescription medication, primary care, mental health care, especially in states like mine where the largest provider today is the county jail of healthcare, mental health care services. And then importantly, making sure that every woman can make her own decisions about her own body and has access to the care that makes that possible. I think that is the best possible path.
I hate to interrupt you, and I know our time is tight, but I'm hearing, and I want to make sure I'm hearing you right, I'm hearing a little bit of nuance in your overall political strategy. You're saying when it comes to assault-style weapons, we need to go for them right now. When it comes to health care, we need to take a stepwise approach. So I'm hearing a slight correct. Am I wrong on that? Like
you are.
Okay, clarify that for me.
So there's no stepwise or half-step approach when it comes to health care. It is universal. It is 100% of America, every child, every woman, every man.
But not Medicare for all. That's the wrong approach.
But not Medicare for all. And I think what you're asking about is the distinction between a single-payer system, which is Medicare for all, where those who have employer-sponsored insurance would have to leave that insurance plan and be forced to join Medicare. And the proposal I'm making, which respects the decisions that our fellow Americans have made, especially those members of unions who fought for those health care plans, under my plan, they're able to keep them.
One last question. Nina tweeted, damn it, Beto, please just run for Senate. Now, the filing deadline to run against John Cornyn in Texas is December 9th. Is there any part of you that's considering that Senate race?
No. Nina, I appreciate it. I'm running for president. And I appreciate the question, because I think what Nina's trying to get at is that all of us have to do our part right now. This is a defining, deciding moment of truth for this country. It's the only reason that I'm in this race. And the question that you asked at the outset, why you? And what is different about your campaign? I think we've been able to demonstrate our ability to bring people in who for far too long were left out of the political process, didn't have a seat at the table, didn't have a voice in the conversation, and able to produce record turnouts, not just among Democrats, but Republicans and independents alike. And importantly, Nina, we can bring Texas to bear 38 electoral college votes. And not only does that put Donald Trump away decisively in the November 2020 election, it also elevates the nominee for U.S. Senate and down ballot races all throughout the state of Texas.
I hear that you used to play in a punk rock band, so we'll end on some Fugazi as we say
Right on.
Thank you to Beto O'Rourke, Democratic
DC
candidate
band.
for yes, indeed. Former Congressman Beto O'Rourke, sir, thanks very much for talking to us.
Thanks for having me on, Joshua.
You can hear the rest of our conversations with Democratic candidates, including Cory Booker, Marianne Williamson, Andrew Yang, and more at the1a.org. Tesla tweeted, Texas will turn blue only if Beto is on the top of the ticket. That may or may not be true, but Texas is slowly getting a little more purple, shall we say? We'll talk about that in a minute. Stay close.